just gonna go ahead and establish this now. I'm gonna do my best through the whole video to try to avoid making a let it go joke, okay? So I saw Frozen 2, and it was, actually, for a while, I wasn't for sure how I felt about Frozen 2. That typically doesn't happen a whole lot either. No matter how polarizing a film, most of the time I can generally get a grasp of how I feel about it. Frozen 2 kinda had me in a weird spot. There are so many things I like about it, but there are also so many things that I don't like about it that I think it was hard to pin down how I definitively felt about the film, which is why you're only hearing about it from me now since I saw it on opening night, in IMAX no less. But I've let this mull around in my head for a couple of weeks, and I think I finally know where I sit on this film. But before we get into Frozen 2, I am a firm believer that context is important. So because I wasn't doing this show when the first one came out, because I was technically still in high school, let's very quickly talk about Frozen 1 and the massive sensation that followed it. I think given my past history of reviews and whatnot, some of you think you know where I sit on this film, but I'm gonna be perfectly honest with you, I think Frozen 1's fine.
You what?
Yeah, listen to that coming from the guy who's consistently nitpicky about every single recent Disney outing this year. Listen to the words "I like Frozen 1" fall out of my mouth. I wouldn't be saying it if it wasn't true, because I really do like Frozen 1. It's a good movie. Granted, I don't think it was worth the massive hype that it garnered, but I'm not gonna say that it wasn't a good film because it was popular. Frozen 1 has a lot to like about it, and a lot not to like. But that's just kind of the vibe with a lot of different Disney films. Every Disney film has at least a little bit that has something wrong with it. But guess what? That's every movie. Every movie has a little bit wrong with it. Just cause it's Disney doesn't make it special. So pretty much any grievances I have about Frozen 1 are pretty much grievances I would have about the movie if any other company had made it. To be perfectly honest, Frozen 1's grievances are kind of double-edged, in that sometimes those grievances both work and hurt itself at the same time. A lot of characters tend to get angry really quick and don't use their brains often, but that's also a criticism you could use of half the other Disney movies, or any movie for that matter, so it's one that you can easily let slide. Most of the soundtrack does a good job of carrying the story, but a couple of them have a bad habit of kind of stopping the plot dead in their tracks. Which isn't to say the soundtrack isn't good, because it's really good, and it was written by Robert Lopez of all people. Some of you might not know who that is right off the bat, but if you're a musical nut like I am, you definitely will, as he's the guy who wrote Avenue Q and helped write the music for Book of Mormon.
A warlord who shoots people in the face? What's so scary about that?
As such, both Frozen 1 and 2 have a soundtrack that has some kind of ironic tinge that's unique to Robert Lopez. Which brings me to Olaf, the one thing that everyone hates about Frozen 1. And personally, I think that's unjustified.
You what?
Yeah, I'm gonna say that too. I like Olaf. I think he's a good comic relief character, and I think the hate that other reviewers have brought his direction is completely undeserved. His character is directly linked to Anna and Elsa's, so he is significant to the story. He's voiced by Josh Gad, who coincidentally also was in the opening of Book of Mormon. Go figure. He has a lot of lines that actually have gotten a laugh out of me more than once.
I don't have a skull. Or bones.
And his own musical number, In Summer, is my favorite song in the entire soundtrack. Granted, this is another one of those double-edged moments where the plot kind of stops in its tracks just to sing this song, but the number is incredibly ironic, and it falls under the type of humor that I happen to love quite a bit. The lack of self-awareness being presented by Olaf in this scene makes everything so much funnier, which again is something I've come to expect from Robert Lopez's work. Dead-on irony is what makes his music work the best.
The internet is really, really great.
That said, I can't really say that for the entire soundtrack, which is probably where I should bring up the elephant in the room. Don't get me wrong, Idina Menzel is a godsend, and I've absolutely loved her since her Wicked days, but goddammit, Let It Go is just an uninteresting song. It's not a bad song, but consider that there are 300 other songs out there that use the exact same chord progression, some of them even in the same key. Yeah, that chord progression is catchy and it catches on really quickly, but it gets old real fast. No wonder people got tired of this one. But other than that, the story is good, acting's pretty solid, I really like some of the line delivery, it's got a nice change of pace from other Disney films. It is overall a solid film and doesn't have too much of a problem for it.
Except for this asshole.
Hans is just a terrible villain, a terrible twist villain at that. I've heard a lot of people say that they really like Hans because he comes out of nowhere and you don't expect him, kind of reflecting that the villain could be anybody, kind of like how Gaston was in Beauty and the Beast. The difference though is that Gaston was already kind of a cunt, so when he makes the full transition of village jackass to dedicated Disney villain, it makes perfect sense. He's already established as an asshole, so it makes perfect sense for him to be the villain. Hans, on the other hand, comes out of literal left field. Upon a second viewing, if you're paying attention, you'll realize that there is absolutely nothing that lines up with Hans' motivation. Okay, so he wants to get rid of Anna after marrying her, get rid of Elsa, and become King of Arendelle because he's the 13th in line for his own throne. Kind of sneaky, okay, whatever. But there are so many things he does in this movie that go against his own plan that just seem to circumvent it in the long run. If he needed to get rid of Elsa for his plan to work, why did he save her in the ice castle in this scene? Wouldn't it have made more sense for him to let the other guy from Wesselton get rid of her? It seems like you've overcomplicated things for yourself by letting Elsa live and bringing her back to prison, which clearly doesn't work out for you. In fact, the movie seems very intent on building up the Duke as the villain, only to throw Hans completely out of nowhere for the sake of a twist. I don't think this was the intention either, because the way Han talks and the things that he sets up clearly go against his own plan. It's just a literal character shift, a complete 180 that just goes against everything the film was setting up, and it just feels like a twist for the sake of having a twist. And it's really the only major complaint I have about the film, because it just doesn't make any goddamn sense. I'm a fan of twist villains usually when they're done correctly. Toy Story 2 and Monsters Inc. come to mind. A good twist villain not only subverts the expectations of the viewer, but when it's revealed, it makes everything fall into place that much better. Hans, on the other hand, doesn't feel like a subversion of expectation. It just feels like a twist to expand the movie another 10-15 minutes, because without it, let's face it, the conflict would end right then and there. But other than those few issues, Frozen 1 is a fine film, and I didn't mind revisiting it in preparation for Frozen 2. It's still a very entertaining watch, and I would gladly watch it again. Anything to see the dynamic between Kristoff and Sven again, for sure. And I'm giving this movie a 7 out of 10. But we all know the story after Frozen 1. Immediately upon its release, it went nuts. Everywhere you looked, everyone was going nuts about Frozen. Frozen merchandise, Frozen advertising, the goddamn song everywhere. No one had seen this kind of popularity with a Disney film since, well, I want to say the Aladdin and Lion King years, but I technically was a baby around that point and couldn't quite remember. But needless to say, people kinda went nuts over this movie. So it was absolutely no surprise to anybody, myself included, when a sequel was announced. And thus, we were finally graced with Olaf's Frozen Adventure. Nah, just kidding, Frozen 2. Although that 20 minutes short before Coco cannot go unmentioned here. I think this kind of marked the point where everyone was starting to get sick of Frozen because everyone was here to see Coco and was confused because they thought they saw the wrong movie, myself included. For the love of God, Disney, you're really trying to get me to hate Olaf, but it's not gonna happen. Stop trying to make me hate Olaf. This short gets a 4 out of 10. Now give me the dancing skeletons like I asked, Disney. Alright, let's get to the one everyone wants to talk about. Like I said when I started the video, I didn't really know where I sat on this film, but let me explain to you what I mean by that. If Frozen 1 is a movie filled with small little double-edged moments that make up the entirety of the film, then Frozen 2 is a dual-edged daikatana. There is a lot of things about this movie that I love quite a bit, but that said, there's probably about an equal amount of things that I don't like about it. This story is kind of stronger than the first one. Granted, that story is kind of pulled out of the ass of the first movie and isn't delivered all that well, but it is a little bit stronger. The first movie kind of dumps you right in the middle of the childhood of the two main characters and allows you to kind of piece things together on your own, but the second movie feels the need to dump a crap load of exposition right at the beginning. Not to mention the way the story opened made me feel that the writer had just watched Avatar: The Last Airbender maybe a little too much, and the story does kind of have that problem consistently throughout the entire movie. And Frozen 2 really has a bad habit of breaking the show don't tell rule, because they explain a lot without really showing you a whole lot, and anything they show they just explain right off the bat anyway. But hey, the build up to the third act is pretty good, and then the payoff is pretty neat. And some character motivations are a little bit screwy from the last movie as well. It started out cute at first, but Anna and Kristoff just got a little bit annoying with their side plot. Kristoff is trying to propose to Anna, and Anna is jumping to conclusions constantly or getting distracted by something. When you've seen it one time, you've seen it every time throughout this movie. This is one of those side plots that seems to stop the movie dead in its tracks to tell it every single time. Which leads me to the soundtrack for this movie, again written by the same people from the first one, but the soundtrack is actually a lot better than the first one. There's a lot more interesting music going on this time around. Frozen 2's Let It Go number Into the Unknown is a lot more interesting and something I would not mind on repeat, unlike Let It Go. That Panic at the Disco cover was pretty gnarly too, not gonna lie. This'll all make sense when I am older, Some Things Never Change, Show Yourself. There's a lot of good numbers in this one. There is one I have trouble pegging down, and that's Lost in the Woods, which is Kristoff's number. The movie does this weird thing where it starts to break the cinematography and go full music video on this number. The song itself doesn't really match the rest of the soundtrack either, kinda has that same problem that Speechless had in the Aladdin remake, and the sudden music video presentation of it kind of breaks the flow of the narrative, although it does explain the increase of Bohemian Rhapsody memes the moment it came out. But outside of the movie, it's not a bad song by any means, just a weird one. But as I stated before, the development in this movie is a lot stronger than the first one. Elsa has much more room to grow as a character than she did in the first one. There's some really cool world building going on with the introduction of Northuldra and an actual world map to give context of how big this world actually is. The slight mystery behind what's going on in this forest and the introduction of all of the spirits is genuinely fascinating, and oh my god, that salamander! Oh my god, his name is Bruni! Oh, that's so adorable! Yeah, this little salamander buddy kinda got me off guard. I'm very happy that he's included in this movie. Granted, I know why he's here, and I know why he looks this cute. I'm full aware of the intention here, but the way I see it, there's a lot of passion that's going on in this movie, and every movie to some extent has to follow advertising and merchandising, especially for a Disney movie. So the way I see it, if there's clearly passion going into the project and the character is more than just a cute thing for the sake of being cute, then I say you've earned the right to merchandise the hell out of that thing. Bruni is directly tied to the mystery of the four spirits. He's not just a cute thing for the sake of being cute. Him being a cute little salamander is part of the mystery. You can't say the same thing about Pascal, another lizard creature from a different Disney movie who has no tie to the plot. He's just there as a companion just to look cute and to sell toys, obviously. But even Tangled has its own charms that I can forgive Pascal not really having a reason to be there. I guess what I'm trying to say is, so long as there's passion clearly going into something even as corporate as a Disney property, then there's really nothing wrong with merchandising. In fact, I will sooner buy a Bruni toy, or a Porg for that matter, sooner than I will a Minion toy of any kind. I'm getting ahead of myself there. And I won't really go into spoiler territory, but the movie does end on a very strong note. Arguably though, it's a note I think it should actually end on. I really don't think a Frozen 3 is going to work after this one. Although Frozen 2 does build upon what the first one started, it did still have to pull things out of nowhere just to even get off the ground. It did feel a little bit forced, and I feel a Frozen 3 is only going to enforce that feeling. But animation is constantly improving. I mean, there are a lot of really interesting sequences in Frozen 2, but considering that Frozen is essentially a story of two sisters who have frankly reached as much development as they're gonna get, a Frozen 3 would just kind of force even more out of characters that don't need anything more out of them. But who knows, maybe they'll make a 45-minute short film that you have to sit through before you can see the new Pixar film or something. After thinking about it for some time, I think Frozen 2 is right in the same place Frozen 1 was for me. The story is better, but the delivery is worse. The soundtrack is better, but the pacing is weird. The second one has a salamander and the first one doesn't. But hopefully, if anything comes out of this, it's that this one hopefully isn't as over-sensualized as the first one was. Bottom line though, I did enjoy this, and I have a feeling I'd be entertained by watching it again. I don't think it's a waste of your money, and I think you should give it a shot. But again, because of everything good and bad about this movie, it kinda sits in the same place as Frozen 1 for me, which is why I'm also giving Frozen 2 a 7 out of 10. And before you ask, no, I don't give a shit about the internet freaking out about Olaf's height. Someone made a fake entry in the wiki and then everyone thought it was real. He is not over 5 feet tall. Just let it go, okay? Wait. Oh, god damn.